Good morning, all. Dr. Pete with you guys. This week, the topic of our session will be the question of salt. I've been getting tons and tons of questions about this, and so today we're going to dive into that topic. Now, in the past, I do have a video on my YouTube channel that addresses this issue, and one of the major questions that I've been getting repeatedly is that 10 to 12 grams of table salt a day seems like it's really high. That's number one. And number two, people have commented, well, what we're hearing from some of the other experts is that we need to limit salt in the diet. So let's dive in. What I want to impress upon you at the beginning is the concept that we're really talking about salt in regard to two distinct issues: the amount of salt that we eat on the standard American diet versus how we handle salt when we are low carb. So let's get started. There are really two effects of salt on the standard American diet that are linked to the same thing. So remember, we understand that the driving factor in gout is the formation of uric acid, an acute sudden rise of uric acid within the cell caused by the ingestion of alcohol, fructose containing substances, and hyperglycemia. The typical meal, the typical meals that occur on the standard American diet. And what are the effects of that? So one of the issues is high blood pressure, and the reason this is happening, which I'm going to get into in a little more detail in a second, has to do with the fact that the production of uric acid disrupts the nitric oxide pathway, which causes our circulatory system to not manage the degree of vasodilation versus vasoconstriction. So the system stays constricted, blood pressure rises. There are deleterious effects. Off the top of my head, the kidneys is probably perhaps the number one issue there. The other part of this is because of hyperglycemia, where we have high blood glucose during the standard American meals, we have activation of the polyol pathway, which, as I've described a lot in my broadcasts, leads to formation of endogenous fructose. And then we have the issues concerning nitric oxide. So let's proceed in the presentation. So one of the major effects here that we have to pay attention to is the production of hyperglycemia during these standard American meals. And as I just mentioned, but now a little bit more specific, we end up producing endogenous fructose because of the activation of the polyol pathway. And don't forget that high salt also activates the polyol pathway. And in the standard American diet, it's likely we have both hyperglycemia and high salt at the same time activating the polyol pathway, which produces an acute sudden rise in uric acid. And the sudden acute rise in uric acid causes the downregulation of nitric oxide. And one of the functions of nitric oxide is to manage the vasodilation and vasoconstriction issues with the circulation of blood through our system. So when nitric oxide gets downregulated, to keep things simple here, then the system remains constricted and blood pressure rises. So this is the main reason why the experts like Lustig and Johnson and Perlmutter advocate for reducing salt in the diet. This is one of the main reasons. But you need to remember that they're coming at this from a particular perspective, and that is the perspective of somebody eating the standard American diet. And so now what we want to do is shift to what happens on a ketogenic diet and why I have a recommendation that you need to elevate the amount of salt. So let's see if we can sort that out. So firstly, I want to draw your attention to this 2014 paper. of which there were many, many authors. I'm only showing a handful of them here. The main take home of this paper was that you can reduce all-cause mortality by sticking to between 3 to 6 grams of sodium per day. If we look at just one of the segments of their data, here you can see a graph that's U-shaped. There is a point at the bottom of that hill, right? The hill dropping down from the left. You can see there's a well down there, and then the curve lifts again. This is showing you data of all-cause mortality. That would be somebody who's gonna die from a variety of metabolic options or diseases. And you can see at the bottom of that curve there where it happens, where we limit or we minimalize all-cause mortality, that this is happening between 4 and 6 grams of sodium per day. Now, I think where we get into some confusion is in two places. What happens when we go onto the ketogenic diet? How do we handle salt intake? Secondly, what's the difference between talking about grams of sodium and talking about grams of table salt? Because there is a difference. So firstly, let's talk about what happens when we go on to the ketogenic diet. So on the ketogenic diet, for gout remission, we are cutting the alcohol, we are cutting the sugar, high fructose corn syrup, agave syrups, honey, and processed food. Then we are also cutting into the carbs. And when we lower the carbs, we necessarily are also lowering insulin expression. And when we lower the insulin expression, we are pulling the insulin pressure off of the kidneys. And the kidneys go from a state under insulin expression where they were storing water and salt to a new state where the kidneys are venting water and salt. So when you go onto the ketogenic diet, one of the things that we have to be careful about is staying hydrated, number one, because the kidneys are going to be venting the water. And an average human needs about 1.5 liters of water a day because we're peeing that out over the course of 24 hours. So I advocate for drinking about 3 liters, approximately 3 liters of water a day. Some experts are going to say this is going to be between 6 to 8 glasses of water. All right. So we need to increase the hydration as we go on to the ketogenic diet because the kidneys are going to be pushing water into the urine. Secondly, we're losing salt as we go on to the ketogenic diet because, again, we've pulled the insulin pressure off the kidneys. So we need to elevate the salt intake. And you're going to know if you're not getting enough salt because one of the things that people complain about when they go onto the ketogenic diet is this thing called the keto flu. And it usually occurs within 2 or 3 days of going onto the diet and includes the symptoms. I'm going to just read here because I always end up forgetting one. Lightheadedness is common. Immediate onset fatigue. Like 1 second you're walking around feeling okay, and then the next second it's like a lightheadedness and a fatigue, and there can be headachiness with this, and also even nausea. And all of this is a sudden onset, and it literally goes away immediately if you just have a little bit of salt. I used to just put a little bit of salt into water, and again, I produced a video on this. And because I got pretty technical about it during my keto adaptation to make sure I was getting enough salt every day. And this is where this question came up about, geez, Dr. Pete, it seems like 10 to 12 grams of salt is a lot. All right, now let's address this issue between sodium and between table salt. So how much salt should I be eating? How do we get our sodium? We mostly get our sodium by salting our food, and the sodium is composed of both sodium ion and chloride ion. And this is a chemical compound that has a certain mass. The sodium makes up 39% by mass of sodium chloride, and the chloride comes in at 61%. So 1 gram of sodium chloride is is not 1 gram of sodium. So if we use my example, and I'm advocating between 10 to 12 grams of sodium chloride each day, or table salt, when you first start the ketogenic diet, in order to offset the amount of salt that you're excreting. Let's talk about what that means. So we're talking about between 10 to 12 grams of table salt that has both the sodium and the chloride. So of that 12 grams, to stick to my example, but you could pull out a calculator and follow along with me here if you would like. Just pause the video, pull out the calculator, and do the calculations yourself. 39% of 12 grams of sodium chloride is approximately 5 grams of sodium. And if I go back very quickly to this diagram, you can see that 5 grams of sodium puts us literally in the bottom of this curve where all-cause mortality is lowest. So we're not overeating. We're not overeating the sodium. All right, and you can run the same calculation for 10 grams. It's just going to be 10 times 0.39, and that will give you the amount of sodium that you're ingesting each day. So I hope this allows you to understand what I'm talking about. There's a difference between the mass of sodium and the mass of the table salt. The sodium is only 39% by mass of that material or substance. Now, how can you manage this, right? Because some of you have raised the concern about this. Maybe some of you are salt sensitive, right? And you're going, okay, so I'm going to be adding this salt at the beginning of the ketogenic diet. How do I know if it's having an adverse effect on my blood pressure? Because as I've advocated through all of this, you should be measuring biomarkers. And I take my weight, my blood pressure, my ketones, and my blood glucose every single day. And I record them. You can do it in an app. There's plenty of good ones out there. I use Heads Up Health, or you could put it in a paper logbook if you prefer to do it that way. The reason I like an app is because usually there is a way for you to graph the data, and that's what you see on the right. On the right, you're looking at my personal blood pressure data. This is a snapshot of some many months, and you can see there's two things you can see here, because during that time period that I have here, I was eating, 12 grams of table salt every day. And so what are the observations? The first is you can see my blood pressure is going down. All right. It has decreased since I started the ketogenic from me being in the high 130s to now being in the mid to low 120s. Yes, that has happened over the last 3 years, and I'm now in my 4th year of the ketogenic diet. And people, this is consistent with the literature, especially if you look at the literature that has been published by Virta Health. They assert the same thing that I'm talking about, that when you go on the ketogenic diet, blood pressure comes down. And that's in fact what I've seen with myself. The second part of this is you can see my blood pressure results as I've been what some people would argue high salt, and you see that there's not a problem. My blood pressure is going down. And you can show this data to your doctor when you're talking to the doctor. So the question is, for how long do you need to manage this? I'm talking about the beginning of the ketogenic diet, and keto adaptation on average, no matter what you hear on the internet, there's a lot of people out there that are going to say that, oh, well, you just need to manage the salt for a couple of weeks. But I think that that's only true if you're dealing with a young individual whose system is resilient, and not somebody like me who's in my 60s and, recently came up as being pre-diabetic and a gout sufferer and all that business, right? We have chronic damage that's been done to our organs, and the dominant ones being the pancreas, the liver, kidneys, for example, and our chondrocytes that are in the joint where the gout is, right? We've done this damage. Question is, how long does it take for people like us to keto adapt? And I got to tell you, it's not a couple of weeks. At minimum, you're talking about a few months here. And more realistically, in my own journey, I saw that it took my lipid panel in terms of normalizing, right? My triglycerides coming down, my HDL going up. So anyway, what's my point? My point is that uh, that this is somewhat of a gray area, right? I no longer at this point, with 3 full years of ketogenic eating behind me now, sit around measuring salt out into my drinks all day long. I still put a pinch of salt in my coffee in the morning. I have 3 of those. And then after that, I just make sure to salt my food. That's it. It's not that complicated, right? How do you know when you hit that? It's a process. And if you are measuring biomarkers over time, you're going to be able to track this, right? And I guess the one thing I left out when I was talking about the biomarkers, because my uric acid does not fit handily into my Heads Up Health app. So my uric acid values, I take those all the time, and those are in a logbook that where I write the value down. The other thing I would recommend is a supplement, and this is the one that I use. Let me just remove this. There we go. And how I arrived at this particular supplement that provides calcium, magnesium, and zinc every day was trial and error. With this advice, remember, I'm not a medical doctor, but this is what I've done to put my gout in remission and to reverse my diabetes. And so I'm going to sign off now, and I'll see you guys next week. If you have questions, any questions come up, just put them down in the comments section. And you know, with this video that I address them. I'm looking and reading all the time. And when a pressing issue like the salt question comes up, then I'm going to tackle it. If you enjoyed this presentation and this is the first time you've joined us, please hit the subscribe button and the bell next to it so you know the next time when we publish a video. Have a great day and see you next time.